Do we have to disclose identities in this podcast?
We don't have to.
Okay.
Relationship is never built in rows. So in the auditorium, it's set not to build relationship.
Right.
Relationship is built around the table.
Yeah. He starts walking toward me, and I said, our church does these cookies just to show you God's love and welcome you to the community. And he said, "What did you say?" I said, "Well, our church," and before I even finished, he collapsed on the ground sobbing. And I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "I have a gun over there, and I was about to kill myself. And I was sitting here praying, God, if there's another way, send me a sign." And so I sat there with this man for quite a while until his family and stuff got there. And he just kept saying, he heard me, he answered me.
Frankly, we've got a lot of lukewarm people in our churches.
I mean, I beg God to take the desire to pastor away.
One of my favorite Hendricks quotes, Howard Hendricks, is, not Jimmy, you can impress somebody at a distance, but you can only impact them up close.
God can handle the big questions.
Hi, I'm Chris McNeil, and this is Ministry on the Move, a journey podcast interviewing pastors and ministers across the country. As the father of the McNeils, I get to travel all across this land singing the gospel, and one day it dawned on me that I was already having great conversations with pastors. And then came the conviction that maybe I should hit the record button and share these inspiring, insightful, and hopeful conversations with you. Join me on a journey to churches of all shapes and sizes, different parts of the country, and see just what it takes to shepherd the body of Christ. For more information on the McNeils, you can visit us at mcneilmusic.tv or mcneilmusic.com, or follow us on Facebook at The McNeils with 2 L's. Thanks for joining us, and here's the show. Well, this is Chris McNeil. This is episode number 1, 2, 3, 4. This is episode number 5, if I'm counting right. And my guest today is John Wiesner. He is the pastor at Chapelwood Missionary Baptist Church in Huntsville, Texas. Huntsville is on I-45, kind of between Houston and Corsicana, broadly speaking. John, you and I, we met in either 2015 or 2014. I can't remember exactly, when you invited the McNeils to sing at another church that you were pastoring at the time. And that church still holds the record for the most invites to the McNeils that we've had in our almost 10-year ministry. And I can't believe how green and young we were, so clueless, and yet you took a chance on us, and we thank you for that. You're now the pastor of Chapelwood Missionary Baptist. What was the transition like moving from one church to another?
Well, whenever we were up at Spring Hill in Pittsburgh, Texas, whenever I first got you guys to come in and sing at our church, like you said, kind of an unknown, taking a risk. If I remember exactly right, I knew you were in the area, didn't know who you were, didn't know anything about you, and I asked, made an inquiry on Facebook, I think, and said, "Hey, send me a CD of what you sing," because I wanted to make sure it was scripturally, sound and that type of thing. So I got the CD, and it sounded great, and I said, "Okay, I think these guys are a fit for us." And so on a whim, I said, "You guys come," and there you are, and the rest is history for sure, because Spring Hill does have the record. I'm somewhat jealous of that because I got that started, and so now I can't get you as near and as often as I would like, because you're saying, "Oh, well, we're at Spring Hill again." So, but that being said, we got to a place there at the church where the membership had increased. When we went there was probably 12. When we left, there was close to 40. The church had been paid off. They had gone through a building program while I was there. The church got paid off. Things were there financially. They had a good good place, good leadership. And so I really felt as though it was time for me to step back and go a different direction. Felt as though that God had used us there for what he needed us. And so it was time for us to just step back. And so we turned over the reins to the deacon of the church. He is now the pastor of that church. And so we felt like that was a good transition. So I took about a year away from actively pastoring, went back to seminary, finished up my degree. And during that time, we decided that we would make a move back to our home location of Palestine, Texas, and that's where I reside. We own a business there, and so we just dove into the business, purchased a home again in Palestine. And then I had been at Sam Houston State University in Huntsville years ago. That's where I attended college. I knew that Chapelwood Missionary Baptist Church was here. I had a good friend in the church who was an elderly pastor, retired pastor. And so I reached out to him at some point and I said, hey, I know you're without a pastor. If you need somebody to come in and do supply preaching, I'll be glad to do that. So anyway, the rest is kind of history. I came in after the pastor had left and moved on. He was transitioned out because of a school. He was a bivocational pastor. He was principal of a school, or assistant principal, got moved to a different school district. So the vacancy was here. I said, I'll come in, fill in for a couple of Sundays, help you guys out, see what we need to do. And that was 4 years ago.
Right. Yeah, one Sunday leads to 2, leads to 2 months, leads to, yeah.
That's been the story of my life. I mean, I showed up at one point at a church, and we just visited the church, just visited. Walked in the church, never been in there before, just visited the church. They immediately knew who I was, that they knew that I had pastored before, and my wife and I were there. And so when we got ready for worship that morning, someone in the church stood up and read the resignation letter of the pastor who was ill and in the hospital. And that was on a Sunday. And Monday, I got a phone call that said, hey, would you come and fill in next Sunday and preach? You were there yesterday. You knew what happened. Our pastor resigned and said, would you come in and fill in? And I said, sure. So that lasted for almost 7 years.
Wow. Does being bivocational help with your ability? It sounds to me like the Holy Spirit just kind of moves John around to wherever he's needed. Does being bivocational assist? It sort of reminds me of the story of Paul, right? Who was a tent maker and yet going from place to place, doing what the Holy Spirit told him to do.
When I surrendered to preach 20 some odd years ago, I was in the middle of a career then with the prison system in Texas. And so I said, Lord, I feel like you want me to go preach. I feel like this is what you want me to do. Can I finish out my career here? Can I do what I'm supposed to, what I've invested in? Can I do that? Will you allow me to do that? I felt like he gave me clearance to do that, to finish out that. So I immediately, went into pastoring and still working full time. And I've just continued to do that as job or career has transitioned from one fact to the other of leaving a government position now and being self-employed. And it has allowed me the freedom to minister more freely and openly and really minister, I guess, publicly, because in our present situation of us being business owners, we are an extension of Chapelwood in 90 miles away. Mm-hmm. And so we tell everyone who comes into our office that this is a ministry, that you're going to see Jesus in this office. You're going to hear Jesus. You're going to hear prayer. You're going to be a part of prayer. We're going to pray for you, pray with you, because people who come to my office, they come and they have, it's a part of their life of what they have to do when they come to see us. And so people who have gone through a divorce, people who have lost a loved one, people who have received a cancer diagnosis, people who've had to bury a child, people who've had to lose their home, people who have filed for bankruptcy, all types of life issues come at us. And I never know who or what is going to walk through that door, sit at my desk and say, here's what I have, here's my issue. And so then we go with that. And A lot of times people just come into our office and they say, I'm not here for that reason. I'm here because I know there's a pastor here.
Mm, really?
I need prayer.
Wow.
So that happens.
You don't even have a sign outside.
No,
Huh.
no. But our clients know that I pastor a church, and they
Right.
know that this is a Christian environment. They know it's a Christian atmosphere, and we make no bones about it. We tell everyone who comes in, okay, that this is who we are, this is what we are, and this is what we believe, and we're here to help you in any way we can.
So yeah, I've got my mind's kind of swirling right now because there's 2 or 3 questions that I'm going to consolidate into one big one. We're in Huntsville, Texas.
Yes.
State penitentiary is here. You live in Palestine. That's
Yes.
an hour away.
Yes.
And your church sits on the interstate, literally on the frontage road of Interstate 45. Talk about the geographical challenges that those things kind of present, and the community environment. I'm assuming that there's a lot of people here whose work is tightly revolves around the prison system. I don't know if there are people here who with loved ones on the inside, or if everybody just works at the prison. What are the challenges of you not being in Huntsville, the church being on the interstate, and being so close to a state penitentiary?
So you've got several dynamics that go on here in Huntsville, Texas. One, Huntsville, Texas, or Walker County has 5 prisons in this county.
Mm.
And so with 5 prisons, there's roughly 15 to 18,000 offenders that are all within a 15 to 20 minute drive of any direction out of Huntsville, Texas. So you have that dynamic. And each facility or unit has upwards of 1,000 employees or more. So that's a lot of employees. Plus the headquarters, the state agency headquarters is here for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. We'll add in another 2,000 to 3,000 employees there. And I don't know what that number is because I'm about 13 years away removed, or 12 years away removed from the prison system after retiring in 2012. So, but there's a large number of employees who reside in Walker County. And of course, and then yes, you do have offender families that relocate to this area to be close to their loved one who is in prison so that they can visit closer and more routinely. But then also, because this is Walker County, it's home to Sam Houston State University, which is a 4-year college.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a Division III college is what they refer to it as. But it is it's a 4-year college. They offer master's degree, doctor's degrees, all those things. So it's a state-supported institution with roughly, probably, I'm going to say 20 to maybe 25,000 students at any given time. And so we often used to say this back in the day, I don't know if this is still true, that Sam Houston was a suitcase college because people would come up from Houston, they'd go to college, here Monday through Friday, but on Friday or Thursday afternoon after classes, they're back home in Houston. So they weren't here for the weekend. And so we had that stigma about it being a suitcase college. You're far enough away, you can leave Houston and you're far enough away from mom and dad, but then you can still go back on the weekend. So but this is a transitory town. That's how I characterize Huntsville. You have the local residents who have been here forever, and they're here. They're the business owners. They're the school teachers. They are the people who were born here, people who've raised here. They've had careers here, and they have no intention of moving. This is home, and there are that group of people here. But with the prison system, there are always promotions, there's transfers, there's move, and people move constantly through the agency, accepting other positions, and oftentimes it does require a move. And as with the faces of the university, there's going to be a new face there every year, and every 4 years you're going to have a completely different population on campus.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is very transitionary. Back in 1965, almost prior to the construction of the interstate, or as the interstate was being constructed, this piece of property where our church is located, people at that point thought this would be prime real estate, that this would be the place to be. And whenever I was in college here 40 years ago, the feeder roads were two-way. And so people could access this church from a multitude of directions, but they could go, two ways on the feeder road. Well, several years ago, they redirected all the traffic, and so now it's one way. And then our interstate out here is in the middle of a major 5-year construction program, moving from 4 lanes to 6. And so part of our properties had to be purchased. Easements have been granted into our property for gas lines, electrical lines, all those things. And so it's really created a challenge for us, because unless you've been to our church, you will be lost trying to find our church. And even during all of this construction, our church sign has been knocked down by the electricians, hanging new wire and new poles and all those things. And so we've not had a church sign for the last 3 or 4 months, because we've been trying to negotiate, trying to get the church sign replaced. And so that's a process.
Yeah, I missed it today, and I knew where it was. They closed off the exit from coming from the north, and I had to go 3 miles down the road and come back.
That's right. If you miss the exit that we're supposed to take now, you will drive all the way to the state park and have to do the turnaround.
That's where we did. Yeah.
That's right. And I've done it too. So yeah. I didn't realize they closed that exit here back, several weeks ago. And when they did, that kind of messed me up. But so, yeah, you kind of have to know where to go. And so, if you're on the interstate and you're looking for our church, well, you'll probably pass it, and but you can honk or wave or whatever. And the local people who come to our church, the locals, there is a defined path that you have to come. There's only one way to get to this church, and you have to know the way to get here. It's kind of like one way to Jesus. You just got to know the way.
You got to know the way. Yeah. John, you're a bit of a cook, and can you, and I won't say that you pride yourself in it, but you're very good at it. You've always treated us well. Even I'm still thinking back to the first time we stayed in your house, you and Kimberly were living in that log cabin in Pittsburgh. And I think you baked, or you didn't bake, you cooked pancakes for us and sausage. Or no, it was biscuits and gravy. That's what it was. That's what it was. And have always cooked. Talk about hospitality in church life, and how this particular assembly uses that.
A pastor once told me, who was 50 years probably older than me and 50 years more experienced than me, and I think he said it something like this, that there has to be sweet fellowship for the worship to be sweet. And because if we're going to corporately worship, then we have to corporately fellowship. And so our fellowship has to be sweet, because, and to me, in a broader sense, that means that there must be harmony within the church, unity, people who understand, get along, and they love one another. Because if there was a lot of fighting and bickering and biting and things like that, then the worship cannot be sweet, okay? If we're not right with our fellow man, then we're not going to be right with God, and that goes both ways. If we're not right with God, we're not going to be right with our fellow man. And so I do enjoy to cook, and I enjoy hospitality. I enjoy having people in my home. I enjoy having people in our church, and we always want to make people feel at home. When Kimberly and I got married back years ago, I thought that, okay, she had left me a note. She was going to the grocery store to buy groceries. I said, oh, wow, that's so great. I have a wife now who I don't have to worry about going to buy groceries. And so anyway, she came home, and so I helped her unload the groceries. And as we unloaded everything, I asked her, I said, what are we going to eat? And she said, well, this is what I've bought, and this is what we're going to eat. And I said, well, honey, let's make a deal right here. I said, we're in the very first days of our marriage. I said, so let's come to an agreement. I said, how about I do the cooking, because am going to do most of the eating. So how about I do the cooking, and with that, I'll do the grocery shopping, because I know what I like to eat, and I'll do all the cooking. I'll do the cooking. I'll do the grocery shopping, grocery shop buying, and you just make sure that my underwear is clean. And that was our agreement. And she said, I'll do all the cleaning if you do all the cooking. And it's been that way now for 26, 27 years. And so I enjoy cooking, because to me that is therapy. I can go in and I can create something. I can cook something. I get a lot of enjoyment out of putting food together. And then it is so sweet when you have people that you can share that with, because no one likes to eat alone. No, I don't care who you are. I just don't like to eat alone. And so a lot of times, if I'm on the road traveling, or work has called me different places and whatever I need to do, Kimberly say, you need to get you something to eat. And I'll just say, I'm just going to grab a bite on the way. I'm not going to go in and sit down and eat at a restaurant and eat alone, you know? So I do like to cook. And so I want to tell you, it's not biscuits and gravy. That's one word, biscuits and gravy.
Right.
Okay, that's one
Yeah.
word.
Yep. No, not even a hyphen in there.
There's no hyphen, there's no separation, there's no pause. That's all one word.
So good segue. You brought Kimberly into this. Talk to me about the wife's role behind a pastor in a church. How has that worked out for you guys? What are the lessons that you've learned about, she's every bit as much invested in this as you are. And works, I suspect, every bit as much as you do, especially on Sundays. She met us up here today while you were otherwise engaged. What lessons have you learned about doing ministry together, I guess?
Listen to her. The number one thing that a pastor needs to do is to listen to his wife. And the reason why I say that is because as men, we think logically, we think analytically, we think with our minds. And women tend to think with their hearts and their emotions. And so they hear things and they see things through a different lens, they hear it through a different set of headphones. And they listen with their heart, they hear it with their heart, they hear it with their emotion. And so, of course, it's always said that a pastor's wife is his biggest critic, because she's heard every good message, she's heard every bad message, she's heard it all. And so a lot of times I would accuse Kimberly of being the Holy Spirit, simply because she could speak to me like no one else could ever speak to me. And she has the openness, the ability to speak to me. And I know that I have to listen to her when she speaks, because she's going to speak to me in a way that I will understand either where I went wrong, what I did right, how I misspoke, or how I did not understand what was being told to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've learned to listen to my wife. And she is the ultimate compliment to me, because she does work behind the scenes. And here at Chapelwood, and even in our previous churches, Kimberly has always been the hands to decorate, the hands of service. Her spiritual gift is mercy. She will give of herself until she runs dry. And so she just pours and pours and pours and pours. I always accuse her of being the Energizer Bunny. She's going to go and go and go and go until she just falls flat. And but she's the giver. Her spiritual gift is mercy, and so she just gives and gives and gives.
So I suspect that a lot of pastors and their wives are on the giving end of the spectrum. How do you find time to hit the pause button? How do you refresh? How do you recharge the batteries? How do you invest in your wife? How do you keep your marriage sane in a world, in a place that demands so much out of both of you and pulls you in different directions?
That's so tough, because we go through periods of insanity, all right, because we think that if we keep doing this, if we just keep doing this, if we keep doing this, things are going to work out. Well, that's the definition of insanity itself. That is, you keep doing the same thing over and over and over, but you expect,
different results.
A different result. And so, the scripture says, he who desires the work of a bishop desires a good work. Mm-hmm. So it's hard in any sense of the word. It's hard. I hear pastors all the time that have marital difficulties because their wives, sometimes I've heard this instance where the wife says, God called you, but he didn't call me. And they leave, and there's separation in the marriage. Um, Kimberly and I were already married when I felt as though that God had really, really placed a call in my life. I could go back to a previous time when I was about the age of 14 or 15. I felt as though God called me to preach at that age. I was in Glorieta, New Mexico at a youth conference retreat, a large event. And like I said, about the age of 14 or so, really felt like God had called me to preach. And I was really caught up in the emotion and just the whole youth movement. And this was back in the mid 70s and or early 70s, I guess. And anyway, the youth pastor, music minister came to my dorm room that night, and he prayed with me. He talked to me, and when it was all said and done, he patted me on the back and he said, he said, "You're not being called to preach. You're just feeling the music." Well, I
Hmm.
trusted him. I felt he was a mature individual. I felt I respected him. He was an adult. I felt like, well, he knows what he's talking about. So I guess not. So, but I found it strange though that every time that Youth Sunday came up, I was called upon to preach. And so I felt that was kind of weird, but that's what I did. And then so I just went on for years and did not surrender to preach because I'd been told that I was just feeling the music. But fast forward 20 years, God never gives up. And Kimberly and I were in Montana. We were leading Bible study in our home. Our church did not have a pastor where we were at in Montana. So we started a Bible study in our home. It grew from about 4 couples to 20 couples that we had to almost move out to find a place big enough for us to meet. And God really just spoke to us through that couples ministry and just really did a good work in us, both of us, as husband and wife. Um, and then we were forced to move back from Montana to Texas. And during that transition, the church in Montana said, "Will you stay and will you be our associate pastor?" And I said, "No." I said, "I don't think so." I said, "That's not what I'm supposed to do. I'm not called to preach. I'm not called to pastor." And so we moved 1,600 miles to Texas. And guess what? God was there too. And went to a church that didn't have a pastor. And anyway, so here I was sitting on the back row, and I was listening, and they were having a business meeting about how they needed a pastor and wanted to have a pastor, and they had different pastor interviews coming in and all that. And I'm just sitting on the back pew, and I thought, well, here's another church that John's in, and they don't have a pastor. And God spoke to me so loud, and He said, "And until you surrender, they never will.
Hmm.
Until you give up, they never will." And I said, "Well, Lord, I'm going to stay right here, and they're going to find a pastor. And then if you want me to be a pastor of a church, you're just going to make it so abundantly clear to me that I can't move." And so the church called a young man in who was on the mission field. They called him back to pastor, and his name was Dan McGuire. And Dan McGuire came in with his family to pastor this church, and I was there. And I joined the church soon thereafter because now they have a pastor, so I can join. And immediately he comes to me, not knowing who I am or what I am, and he says, "Will you teach the adult Sunday school?" And I said, "I'll do whatever you ask me to do." And so I started teaching the adult Sunday school. And that went on for maybe about 6 to 8 months. And then he came to me and he said, "When are you going to surrender to the Lord to preach?" And I gave up. And I gave up. And Kimberly knew that. She felt that the whole time, and she knew where I needed to be, and she knew I was miserable. And once I did that, I kept my full-time job working at the prison, went to seminary, drove 150 miles a day, did that for a couple of years to get some schooling under my belt. And, I'd been the vacation Bible school director. I'd been the right-hand man of the pastor. I'd been the Sunday school teacher. I'd been a couples Bible study teacher. I had done all the things that I thought that God wanted me to do. And my first day of seminary, I came home and I cried after classes. And Kimberly says, "Why are you crying? What's wrong?" I said, "I know nothing of God. I know nothing of the Bible. I'm as dumb as a box of rocks." And that's where it just really started, from that moment. And so we've had the opportunity to be in, I guess, three churches, three churches, four churches, I guess. We've had the opportunity in 25 years to be in four churches. And God has just put me in a place that I felt that that's where I needed to be used and be available to stay there and do that. One of my seminary professors, he indicated, he said, Wiesner's a good preacher, but he just won't stay put. And he later apologized to me. He's about 100 years old now, and he later apologized to me. He said, "I shouldn't have said that about you." He said, "I know everybody can't stay in one place for 50 years." And I told my professor, I said, "Well, I just felt as though that I go in and I do what God wants me to do, whether it takes 4 years, 5 years, 6, 7, 8, just get what needs to be done." Maybe an agent of change, I don't know, but just get things cleaned up, straightened up, squared away, and get it ready for the next pastor.
There was a church that we sang at, this would have been this is a long time ago, up in Indiana, and the pastor said that his nickname within his association was the Fixer.
Yeah.
And he got sent to the churches that needed fixing up. Talk to me a minute about your responsibility to guard the pulpit. It's not lost on me that you've had the McNeils come in and fill that void, even when you're here. But it's still your responsibility. It's one of the reasons that I have pastors introduce us or pray before the service starts, because I believe there's a transfer of authority. Talk about what it's like to be that steward.
So I cast your attention back to the first time that I invited the McNeils to the church I was pastoring. I said, "Send me a copy of your CD." I wanted to listen to the words of the music. I wanted to find, are the songs that this group is singing, are they scripturally correct? Are they scripturally accurate? Because our children learn the fastest by singing. And they pick up tunes, they pick up ditties, they pick up advertisement slogans, and so that's how, as children, learn. Well, adults are the same way. They're so apt to pick up on a song and sing it, and if they don't know what the words are, they could essentially sing themselves into some form of doctrinal truth if they're not careful. And so, having a person in your pulpit, one, you need to know what they stand for. You need to know what they believe in. You need to know what they're apt to say. And then there has to be a trust factor, that you trust that individual because you feel like you know them, and that you're not going to have to stand up in the middle of the service and say, "Time out, reboot, yeah. Okay, Control-Alt-Delete, all right, and have a reset or whatever there." And so that's one of the things with you guys, is that I have that trust factor fully ingrained. I know that you're going to come into church. I know what the music you're going to sing. I know what it's going to be. I know what it's going to represent. And that's going to be Jesus Christ died, buried, rose again, and all according to the Gospels. And that's what we believe, and that's what we want taught in our pulpit. One of the things that every shepherd has to guard against is what we call an alien in a pulpit. And that's somebody who does not believe what you believe, someone who does not teach that, someone who teaches something that is adverse, wrong, incorrect. The Bible is very clear that there is a true gospel, there is a false gospel. There's no gray gospel, there's no There's no colored gospel. There is just a false and a true. And so we have to make sure that we stand on truth, that we believe the truth, that we know the truth, we practice the truth, we preach the truth. Jesus says, I am the truth. If you get away from Jesus in the pulpit, then you're fixing to preach a false gospel or a false truth. And so one of the things I always admired about the pastor that I surrendered to preach under, Brother Dan McGuire, that I'd mentioned previously, I would always ask him, well, Brother Dan, what you going to preach this morning? Jesus. And I would ask him that every Sunday morning just to get the rise out of him. What are you going to preach? He said, I'm going to preach Jesus. And so that's what, as pastors, that's what we should be preaching. We should be preaching Jesus. Oftentimes we want to preach our pet topics. We want to preach politics. We want to preach about being offended, or how some deacon has hurt our feelings or crossed our wife or whatever. Or we want to preach those things. And I'm telling you, anytime in my ministry when I have thought that that's what I needed to do, it was a mistake first, and I've paid for it dearly, just with the scars. And so we just have to keep the main thing the main thing. It's all about Jesus. It's always going to be about Jesus, and Jesus has to be preached. And when we don't do that, then we're going to fall short, and we're going to miss the point of what we need to do.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Ministry on the Move. If you liked this episode, you're going to love the next one. It's the conclusion of my interview with John, and we talk about burying a friend. Yeah, it's a little heavy. Help us spread the message by forwarding this to your friends, other pastor friends, elders, deacons, bishops, lay people, those that can be encouraged by this ministry. Follow us on Facebook at The McNeils. You can find our schedule on mcneilmusic.tv or mcneilmusic.com. If you have questions for the ministry, I'd ask that you send them to chris@mcneilmusic.com. Would love to hear from you. What questions you think I should be asking pastors. And we'll see you next time. So, in what way is a laser beam like a goldfish? Neither one can whistle. Hey, you waited until this point. You at least can give me a courtesy laugh.